So kind of, what's the big, okay, now we've identified Windows 10, it's going into life. What do we want to do? Windows 11, right? So there's some nuances in terms of what's different between Windows 10 and Windows 11. The biggest one being that there's a significant difference in infrastructure requirements to run Windows 11 than Windows 10 for those endpoint devices. So first and foremost, the processor is require a minimum of two core. Again, 64-bit only. So if you have Windows 10 still 32-bit, that's not an option when you go to Windows 11. So keep that in mind as well. Obviously, there's more memory required. Basically from 64 gig perspective, 64-bit perspective, you're doubling the RAM requirements just for the OS. So keep that in mind. If you've got again, pretty common Windows 10 device was two core, 8 gigs of RAM. Well, now over half that RAM is not going to be committed just to the OS. And then you have to run your app stack on top of that. So be aware that you may have issues or challenges with your existing workload and performance on those desktops if you do just simply upgrade them to Windows 11. Obviously, larger disk requirements as well, so that can potentially be a problem. Again, system firmware, again, UEFI and secure boot requirements. The biggest one, guys, is going to be right here. This is that TPM, Trusted Platform Module. That is really the one that is going to be the kicker for most endpoint devices that have any sort of length of life in them. TPM is a relatively recent requirement that Microsoft has put in place with the Windows 11 requirement. It really helps enhance that security from the pre-boot perspective. So it's just, again, Windows 11 is designed with security first and foremost in mind, and so that's kind of where that requirement comes from. But again, if you do not have that TPM module, you're going to run into trouble trying to just simply do an in-place upgrade, and likely have to be looking at some sort of a hardware refresh. Also, from the graphics card requirements, those go up a little bit, but also note that Windows 11 actively uses the graphics cards and several of the features and functionality that it presents. So it's going to have an impact even from that aspect on what you're running daily. Also, some higher graphics requirements in terms of the resolution and monitor capabilities. So, just some things to keep in the back of your mind when we start looking at this. Is not just a straightforward, I can just upgrade those endpoint devices to Windows 11, click the update button, or we'll let the user click it and run it from the Windows Update. In some cases, you may not even be eligible. So, quick little blurb down here, that bottom link, if you guys grab that, that is a link that will allow you to go to the Microsoft tool that you can download and run on devices to determine if they actually meet PC requirements. If you have a large fleet of devices, I would strongly recommend you start going through this, identifying what categories of device types you have in your environment and ages, and then run this at least on a sample of a couple of those devices and to kind of get an idea of what is or is not compliant or compatible, potentially just do a Windows 11 upgrade, and then begin planning for any infrastructure or transitional plans you have for those non-supported endpoint devices. So, all right. So next up, so given the hardware requirement increases on Windows 11, what's that mean for you folks who may be running EUC environments? So virtualized Windows 11 environments for end user access. So first and foremost, again, your virtualization platform has to be able to provide those virtual TPM capabilities, which generally requires a virtual TPM, a physical TPM chip in the hardware to be able to provide that functionality. So you need to keep that in mind. One of the things we've also noticed from Windows 11 is that by default, it hardware graphics accelerates any RDP connectivity or sessions into the environment. So you can bypass this, but you've got to go in and specifically set the registry key or GPO policy to actually change that fundamental behavior. If you don't, it is going to try to accelerate with whatever hardware graphics that's there, the environment and connect RDP access, which can have a significantly detrimental effect in terms of end user density and performance. Obviously, the OS resources in general, again, you're going to double your RAM footprint and increase your CPU requirements just to run the OS. So again, where you maybe were running 50, 60 VDI sessions on a host, you may be down to 30 or 40. So in terms of capacity, you may end up having to increase your physical infrastructure capacity in the data center to even facilitate being able to move the same number of users to Windows 11. Also, again, increased profile sizes. Again, a lot of new features and functionality in Windows 11 that, again, is going to cause some bloat to those profiles. There is some things you can do to optimize what is being stored in those profiles, and depending on the profile solution you're using, that you'll want to definitely look at and take advantage. But in general, you're going to see a slightly increased size in profiles as well in terms of wherever you're storing your profiles for that EUC environment. And then one of the things that is an option with Windows 11 is that it actually does provide a multi-session environment. So traditionally, when we've done hosted shared delivery models in EUC, that has been wrapped around a Windows Server OS instance. If you're running in Azure or on the Azure stack in your data center, you now have the capability of running Windows 11 multi-session, which is basically providing you that guest OS version, but multi-session connectivity, which was not something that has been previously available. So it's one of the strategies if you have devices that maybe can't go physical endpoints that can't go to Windows 11 today, you could potentially look to provision a multi-session Windows 11 desktop in the Azure environment for those end users potentially, and then leverage that existing endpoint until it expires, and then you potentially transition it to like a thin client, like an iGel software replacement for that to continue to maintain that functionality. So just some things I want to make sure you guys are aware of in terms of what's here from that aspect. Okay. So if we're going to talk Windows 11, the next thing that generally comes up, and most of you have potentially have entitlement to, is Microsoft Intune. So Intune basically is Microsoft's modern endpoint management product that has been heavily integrated with the management and configuration both of Windows 10, but in particular with Windows 11. So some key features here, especially if you're looking at having to do hardware and platform refresh, is the fact that you will need Autopilot provides you the ability to onboard working with specific hardware vendors. You can actually get a hardware ID based on the set of devices you've ordered, provided you can upload into Intune, into Autopilot, so that when that user first turns that device on, the device will go out. It will identify that it's a part of your Intune environment, which means it's going to check for policy, compliance, and then actually do app package deployment. So you can basically off the shelf with no user interaction, have a user ship that device to that user. They can open it up, log in with their enterprise, again, enter ID credentials, put in their two-factor, and then immediately have the device start pulling down the app's software policy and configuration that makes it a working entity device inside of your organizational environment. So with zero hands-on, again, there's some setup and stuff that has to be done in order to do that, but that's one of the key features of Autopilot. Obviously, the big thing here, you also have real-time policy updates. So one of the challenges that I think we all faced 4 years ago when everybody went home from COVID is that, okay, we have all these devices, and if they were domain joined devices, they had policy from a point in time when their access to the network, and then you went home and you didn't have that access. So now you're going to get stuck in that loop where, okay, now I've got to do a VPN, try to update policy, right? It's very complicated when you have devices that are in and out of the network or potentially not even in the network at all. Intune allows us to basically set policy at a organizational level and apply it based upon user and device rules consistently, regardless of where that device lives. So as long as the device is on the network and checking in, it's going to get policy updates to make sure that it is maintaining those compliant and security requirements that we have in the environment. The one here we talk about is app management. So again, you may be, a lot of folks have other app packaging solutions that may be leveraging or using. If you don't have one, this gives you the capability to actually package up your applications, even versions of those applications, push them out. You can also have an app catalog that may, instead of maybe a set of users needs 3 core, and maybe it's a ERP system, the Office suite, and we'll say Chrome browser, right? So you package that up and you deploy that out. Those are mandatory deployments. But then maybe you have some users who maybe they use Slack, or maybe you use, I don't know, some other application that your environment needs, but only select users. You can have those be available for those users to subscribe and install as they need them. So that's a key part of that as well. And again, one of the other things that this does provide is outside of traditional WSUS functionality is the fact that you can actually do feature updates. So you can push a Windows 10 22 or 24H2 update out to your Windows 10 enrolled Intune devices. Again, because that's one of the other things that I think we talked about maybe a little bit earlier. I didn't highlight it specifically, but just keep in mind that Windows 10 end of life dates are for Windows 10 24H2 specifically versions that you are on. If you're not on that version, most likely you are already potentially outside of support and or end of life dates for those other versions. So just keep that in the back of your mind as well.